On the night of October 23rd, 2024, beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Shadow Court Palace in Boston's Midnight District, Emily Thorne, 22 years old and recently hired as a serving maid, committed the most dangerous mistake in vampire history. She made hand signals to the mute son of King Nathaniel during the royal banquet. The entire hall fell silent as hundreds of immortal eyes turned toward her trembling form. The fragile crystal glasses captured candlelight like frozen stars as the human girl's heart hammered in her chest, unaware that she had just become the first person outside the prince's tutor to speak his language. The ancient marble floor seemed to vibrate with tension. The king's ruby-studded crown gleamed like fresh blood, and the cold autumn air sliced through the hall's grandeur. This is the story of how silence became a bridge between worlds that had been divided for centuries. Subscribe now to discover how one human girl's compassion would move heaven and earth to transform an entire kingdom. The crystal glasses captured candlelight like frozen stars. Emily's hands trembled as she balanced the silver tray, weaving between lords in velvet capes and ladies dripping with jewels. 3 months working at the palace, and she still wasn't accustomed to the weight of vampire eyes following her every movement. "More wine for Lord Cassius," the head servant hissed, pushing her toward the main table. Emily's heart hammered. The main table where the king sat. She had seen King Nathaniel only from afar, a figure carved from marble and shadows, with eyes that could freeze the blood in her veins. Tonight, he wore black armor, even at dinner, as if expecting war to break out between the soup course and dessert. But it wasn't the king who made her pause. It was the small boy seated beside him. Prince Alexander couldn't have been more than 7 years old. While nobles laughed and toasted around him, the child remained perfectly still, staring at his untouched plate. His dark hair fell over pale cheeks, and his small hands rested in his lap like wounded birds. No one spoke to him. No one even looked at him. Emily approached the table, her steps silent on the marble floor. She reached for the king's empty glass, her movements careful and rehearsed. "Don't make eye contact, don't speak unless spoken to. Don't." A passing servant bumped her elbow. Time slowed, the tray tilted. 3 crystal glasses slid toward the edge, spinning through the air in a cascade of silver and glass. They shattered on the table directly in front of Prince Alexander. Red wine exploding across the white tablecloth like fresh blood. The entire hall fell silent. 500 conversations died mid-sentence. Forks froze on their way to mouths. Even the musicians in the corner stopped playing, the final note hanging in the air like a held breath. Emily's knees hit the floor. "Forgive me, Your Majesty, I—" But her eyes met the prince's first. Wine had splashed onto his sleeve. A shard of crystal rested inches from his hand. Yet the boy didn't recoil, didn't cry out. He simply stared at the mess with wide, dark eyes, his small body rigid with fear he couldn't express. Without thinking, Emily's hands moved. "Are you okay?" She signed quickly, instinctively, the way she used to sign to her little brother back in the village before fever took him. Her fingers formed the familiar shapes, the gesture for "you," the concerned expression, the questioning tilt. Prince Alexander's head snapped up. His eyes met hers, truly met hers for the first time. They were midnight-colored, enormous in his small face, and suddenly filled with something that looked like lightning caught in a bottle. The prince's hands flew from his lap. "I am fine," he signed back, his movements jerky with excitement. "You know sign. You know how." His little hands trembled as they formed the words, moving so quickly they blurred. A smile broke across his face, the kind of smile that hadn't seen sunlight in a very long time. "No one understands signs except the teacher," Alexander continued, leaning forward in his chair. "Are you new? What's your name? Do you know the sign for dragon? I learned yesterday." Silence. The king's voice cut across the hall like a blade through silk. All heads turned, all spines straightened. Emily felt the word wrap around her throat like a noose. King Nathaniel rose from his throne, unfolding to his full height. He was tall, impossibly tall, with shoulders that blocked the candlelight behind him. His crown weighed on his brow, dark metal studded with blood-red rubies. He wasn't looking at Emily. He was looking at his son. Prince Alexander's hands froze mid-sign. The smile slipped from his face, replaced by that terrible stillness Emily had seen before. The boy's eyes dropped to his lap and his shoulders curved inward, making him even smaller than he already was. The king's gaze shifted to Emily. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move. His eyes were the color of winter storms and equally cold. "You," he said quietly, "stand up." Emily's legs barely supported her as she rose. Around the hall, nobles whispered behind jeweled hands. She caught fragments of their words. "Signed to the prince. Never seen him respond to anyone, just a human maid. How dare she?" King Nathaniel stepped down from the platform, each step deliberate. The crowd parted before him like water before the prow of a ship. He stopped 3 paces from Emily, close enough that she could see the silver threads in his dark hair, the faint scars on his knuckles that spoke of old battles. "Where did you learn this?" His voice was low, but it carried across the silent hall like thunder. "In my village, Your Majesty." Emily's voice faltered. "My brother was born deaf. I learned to speak with my hands so he wouldn't be alone." The king's expression didn't change. "Your brother? Where is he now?" "Dead, sir. 5 years ago." Something flickered across the king's face, too quick to name. He looked back at Prince Alexander, who watched them with desperate, pleading eyes. The nobles waited for the king's judgment. Some looked eager, hoping for entertainment. Others looked uncomfortable, perhaps remembering their own humanity buried deep beneath centuries of immortal pride. King Nathaniel turned to his butler, a thin vampire with silver spectacles who stood near the throne. "Find out this woman's name and station. Report to my office within the hour." He returned to his seat without another word. The musicians began to play again, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. Conversations resumed. Servants rushed to clean up the spilled wine and broken crystal. But Prince Alexander's eyes never left Emily as she was led away. His small hands moved one last time, hidden beneath the table, where only she could see. "Thank you." Emily spent the next hour in the servants' quarters, waiting for the executioner's summons. The other servants gave her pitying looks and a wide berth, as if misfortune might be contagious. "You're the girl who spilled wine on the prince?" an older woman asked, shaking her head. "Better make peace with whatever god you pray to, child." But when the butler finally arrived, he didn't bring guards. He brought instructions. "You are to report to the East Wing kitchen at dawn," he said, adjusting his spectacles. "You will be assigned to the morning shift. Your duties will include preparing and delivering the morning coffee service to the prince's courtyard." Emily stared at him. I'm not being dismissed." The butler's lips twitched. "No, girl, you're being promoted." He left before she could ask what that meant. That night, Emily lay awake in her narrow bed, replaying the moment over and over. The way the prince's entire face had transformed when she signed to him, the way his hands had moved so quickly, so eager, so desperately happy, and the way the king had looked at his son afterward when he thought no one was watching, not with anger, with something that looked almost like longing. The king's private office smelled of old leather and even older secrets. Shadows gathered in the corners despite the fire burning in the hearth, as if even light knew better than to venture too far into Nathaniel's domain. He stood by the window, watching the moon paint silver stripes across the palace gardens. Behind him, his butler waited with the patience of one who had served for 3 centuries. "The human waitress," Nathaniel said without turning. "What do you know about her?" The butler consulted his leather-bound record book. "Emily Thorne, Your Majesty, 22 years of age, arrived from the eastern villages 3 months ago seeking employment. Her references indicate reliability." "And the sign language?" Nathaniel's fingers pressed against the cold glass. "How does a village girl learn such things?" "She had a younger brother, sir, born without speech or hearing. She learned to communicate with him before he succumbed to illness." The butler paused. "The village priest taught them both. Apparently, it is a language used in certain human monasteries for silent prayer." Nathaniel closed his eyes. He had hired 7 tutors for Alexander in the past 2 years. Private instructors who came at dawn and departed at dusk, teaching his son to communicate in the language of hands and expressions. But they were paid professionals doing a job. Tonight, he had watched his son smile for the first time in months. Because of spilled wine and broken crystal, A human girl had given Alexander something no amount of gold could buy, someone who spoke to him simply because she could. The boy was excited, Nathaniel said quietly. I've never seen him move his hands so quickly. Prince Alexander did seem quite taken with her, yes. Yes. Taken. Such a simple word for the desperate hope that had shone in his son's eyes. Nathaniel had seen that look only once before. The day Alexander's mother died, when the boy screamed silent screams no one could hear, his small hands forming words his father couldn't understand. That was the day Nathaniel stopped trying to reach him, not because he didn't love the boy, but because each attempt felt like watching his son drown while standing on the shore, unable to swim. Assign her to the day shift, Nathaniel said, near the prince's wing. The butler's quill scratched against the parchment. Very well, sir. Shall I inform her of the reason for the transfer? No. Nathaniel turned from the window. His reflection in the glass looked older than it had that morning. Let her think it is merely a new assignment. Nothing more. As you wish. The butler bowed and moved toward the door, then hesitated. Sir, if I may speak freely. Nathaniel nodded once. Prince Alexander has been alone for a very long time. Perhaps this is not such a terrible accident after all. After the butler left, Nathaniel sat at his desk and pulled open a drawer he rarely opened. Inside was a painted miniature, his late wife Elena, laughing with baby Alexander in her arms. She had been human once before choosing immortality to stay by his side. She would have known what to do. She would have learned hand language in a week, would have filled their son's silent world with conversation and laughter. But Eleanor was gone, and Nathaniel had an entire kingdom to rule. Wars to plan, treaties to negotiate, 100 crises that demanded his attention every day. Except none of them mattered as much as the small boy who sat alone at banquets, invisible in plain sight. Nathaniel's hand moved experimentally, trying to recall the signs he had glimpsed at dinner. His fingers felt awkward, strange. How did the girl make it look so easy? He pulled his hand back, frustrated. Tomorrow. He would deal with it tomorrow. Meanwhile, in the servants' quarters, Emily stared at her new assignment notice in disbelief. The prince's wing. Her roommate Lily gaped at the notice. That's where they send the most trusted servants. People who've worked here for years. I must have misread. Emily held the paper up to the candlelight, but the words didn't change. Report to the East Wing kitchen at dawn. Deliver the morning coffee service to Prince Alexander's private courtyard. Daily assignment until further notice. You spoke to the prince in that hand language of yours, didn't you? Lily's eyes were wide. Everyone's talking about it. They say he actually smiled. He's just a child, Emily said softly. A lonely child. He's the heir to the vampire throne. Lily grabbed Emily's shoulders. Do you understand what this means? The king doesn't do anything by accident. He's putting you near his son deliberately. A chill ran down Emily's spine. Why would he do that? Maybe he wants to see if it was a fluke. Or maybe... Lily's voice dropped to a whisper. Maybe he's testing you, seeing if you're a threat. I'm not a threat to anyone. But Emily's hands trembled as she folded the assignment notice. The prince looked so scared when the glass broke. I wanted to make sure he was all right. Well, tomorrow you'll have your chance to make sure again. Lily squeezed her arm. Just be careful, Emily. The royal family aren't like us. They don't think like us. And that little boy. He's not just a child. He's the property of the crown. That night, Emily dreamed of small hands forming desperate words in the dark, and a king made of winter watching from a distance, unable or unwilling to reach out. Dawn broke cold and golden over the palace. Emily's hands trembled as she balanced the breakfast tray, not from its weight, but from the knowledge of where she was taking it. The prince's courtyard was at the end of a marble corridor, lined with portraits of stern-faced vampire ancestors. Their painted eyes seemed to follow her, judging, a human maid walking where few were allowed. She pushed the iron gate open with her hip. The courtyard took her breath away. Night-blooming flowers covered every surface. Moonvines and shadow roses that should have closed with the rising sun, but somehow remained open here, their luminescent petals in the morning light. A small fountain bubbled at the center, its water crystal clear. Stone benches curved beneath a weeping willow that shed silver leaves, and there, sitting cross-legged on the grass, was Prince Alexander. He hadn't noticed her yet. His attention was fixed on something in his hands, a small bird's nest cradled carefully in his palms. He examined it with the serious concentration only children can muster, his dark hair falling into his eyes. Emily set the tray on a nearby table. The soft clink of porcelain made Alexander's head snap up. His eyes widened. Then his entire face transformed, that same brilliant smile from the night before breaking across his features like sunrise. "You came," he signed, rising quickly. The bird's nest wobbled precariously. "I thought I might have dreamed you. No one told me you would be here. Are you my new breakfast person? What's your name?" His hands moved so quickly, Emily could barely keep up. She laughed, setting down the teapot before signing back. "Slow down, little prince. Yes, I'm real. My name is Emily." "Emily." He spelled it out carefully with his fingers, learning it. "It's a pretty name. Can you stay while I eat? Please? The tutor doesn't come until after lunch and there's no one to talk to." He stopped abruptly, his smile faltering. His hands lowered, and that wary look returned to his face, the same one from the banquet when his father had spoken. "Sorry," he signed, small and quick. "You probably have other work. I shouldn't keep you." Emily's heart broke. She knelt on the grass beside him, ignoring the dew soaking her dress. "I have nowhere more important to be than right here." Alexander stared at her. Then, slowly, the smile returned. "Really? Really?" For the next hour, Emily learned more about Prince Alexander than she'd thought possible. He showed her his collection of interesting rocks arranged by color along the garden wall. He explained through elaborate signs and animated expressions how he was studying the birds that visited the fountain every morning. A family of sparrows had built a nest in the willow, and he had found this one fallen beneath it. "Do you think they're sad?" he signed, holding the empty nest, "for losing their home?" "Maybe," Emily signed back, "but birds are clever. They'll build a new one." "I would build one for them, but my hands are too big." He looked at his palms sadly. "Well, too big for bird nests, too small for everything else." "What do you mean?" Alexander hesitated. His hands moved slowly now, carefully. "Father has big hands, warrior hands. He can hold swords and sign treaties and lift heavy things. My hands can only do this." He wiggled his fingers, talk that nobody else understands. "I understand," Emily signed. "You're the only one except for the tutor." Alexander sat beside her on the grass. "You know what's funny? In the whole palace with hundreds of people, only 2 can hear me, and one of them is paid to." The casual way he said it, as if he had accepted his isolation as simple fact, made Emily want to scoop him up like the fallen nest and promise to keep him safe. "Well, now you have me," she signed, "and I'm not going anywhere." Alexander's eyes grew suspiciously bright. He nodded quickly, then stood and pulled at her hand. "Come, I want to show you my favorite place." He led her to the farthest corner of the courtyard, where the morning light hit just right, making the dew-covered grass sparkle like diamonds. He sat down and patted the ground beside him. "This is where I come when I'm sad," he signed. "It's pretty. Pretty things help." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher. A sparrow landed on the edge of the fountain, cocked its head at them, then flew away. "Emily," Alexander signed after a while. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why did you help me last night? You could have gotten in trouble. You still might." Emily thought carefully about her answer. "Because you looked scared, and nobody should be scared and alone at the same time." Alexander absorbed this, then he signed with the brutal honesty of children. "I get scared and alone a lot." Before Emily could respond, footsteps echoed from the corridor. They both turned. A figure stood in the archway, silhouetted against the morning sun. King Nathaniel. He wasn't wearing his armor today, just dark clothes that made him seem less like a warrior and more like a man. His eyes moved from Emily to his son, then to their hands, frozen mid-conversation. How long had he been watching? Alexander rose quickly, his earlier joy evaporating. He bowed his head, small and formal and perfectly obedient. The king stepped forward, stopped. His jaw worked as if he wanted to say something but didn't know how. Finally, he turned and walked away without a word. Alexander sat down slowly. He didn't sign anything else that morning, just held the bird's nest in his lap and stared at where his father had been. Rain hammered against the palace windows like 1,000 impatient fingers. Emily had been delivering breakfast to Alexander's courtyard for 6 days now, and every morning the prince was already waiting for her, usually with something new to show. A butterfly wing, a perfectly round stone. Once, a drawing he had made of the two of them sitting by the fountain, but today the courtyard was empty. Emily set down the tray, worry gnawing at her stomach. Had something happened? Had the king changed his mind about her assignment? A small hand tugged at her sleeve. She whirled and found Alexander standing behind her, practically vibrating with excitement. His hair was damp from the rain, his clothes speckled with water. "Come with me," he signed urgently. "I want to show you something secret." "Prince Alexander, you're soaked. You should... Please." His eyes were huge and pleading. "It's important, and it's inside." How could anyone say no to that face? Alexander grabbed her hand and pulled her through a side door she had never noticed before, through a narrow servants' passage, then up a spiral staircase that seemed to climb forever. Finally, they emerged into a long corridor lined with tall windows. At the end was a huge oak door carved with intricate symbols. The royal library. "We can't," Emily signed quickly. "Servants aren't allowed." But Alexander was already pushing the door open. The library was magnificent. Shelves stretched up for 3 stories, connected by spiral staircases and narrow bridges. Rainy light filtered through stained glass, painting the floors in muted rainbows. The smell of old paper and leather hung thick in the air. "Isn't it wonderful?" Alexander signed, his face glowing. "Nobody comes here anymore. Father is too busy. The nobles think reading is boring. It's just me and the books." He pulled her toward a low shelf in the corner, where oversized illustrated books gathered dust. He selected one with a faded cover showing a castle and a dragon. "These are vampire fairy tales," he signed. "The tutor reads them to me, but I like it better when I tell them myself." He opened the book, and Emily saw that someone, likely a tutor from years past, had added small sign language diagrams in the margins, showing how to sign each important word. Alexander's hands began to move, telling the story. His signing was beautiful, expressive and fluid, painting pictures in the air. He signed about a brave knight and a lonely dragon who couldn't breathe fire, about how everyone feared the dragon for what it was supposed to be, not for who it really was. Emily found herself drawn into the tale. When Alexander signed the part where the dragon finally roared, not with fire but with wind that carried flower petals, she acted it out, sweeping her arms wide and making him laugh silently, his small shoulders shaking with joy. "Your turn," he signed, pushing another book into her hands. This one was about a princess who lived in a tower. Emily signed the story, exaggerating her expressions, making Alexander's eyes widen at the scary parts and light up during the happy ones. When she signed about the princess dancing alone in her tower, she stood up and twirled, nearly knocking over a stack of books. Alexander clapped, not making sound, but the gesture of applause anyway. He jumped up to join her, and they spun together among the bookshelves, the forbidden library transforming into a stage for stories only they could tell. They didn't hear the door open. "Alexander!" The king's voice cut through their joy like a blade through silk. Emily's heart stopped. She dropped into a curtsy so quickly her knees struck the floor, pain shooting up her legs. Beside her, Alexander froze mid-spin, his arms falling to his sides. King Nathaniel stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his dark cloak. His expression was unreadable, carved in stone, giving nothing away. "Forgive me, Your Majesty," Emily gasped. "I didn't mean to. The prince wanted to show me. I should have refused." "Stand up." She obeyed, legs trembling. This was it. She would be dismissed, possibly worse. But the king wasn't looking at her. He was watching his son. Alexander stood perfectly still, head bowed, waiting for judgment. All the light had gone out of him, replaced by that terrible, resigned stillness. The king walked into the library. His boots echoed on the marble floor. He passed Emily, past the scattered books, until he stood directly before Alexander. Then he did something unexpected. He knelt, brought himself to his son's level, his cloak spreading around him like spilled ink. Alexander's head lifted slowly, confusion written on his small face. The king's hand moved, awkward, uncertain, forming a single sign, one that Emily had taught him during their morning conversations, though Alexander couldn't know that. Happy. It was rough, the fingers not quite right, but the meaning was clear. You look happy. The king tried to sign, though his hands stumbled over the words. Alexander's eyes widened. His mouth opened in a silent gasp. The king looked at Emily then, and she saw something in his expression she hadn't expected. Not anger, not suspicion. Desperation. "Stay," he said softly. "Continue." He moved to a chair by the window, far enough to give them space, close enough to watch. He didn't pick up a book or pretend to work. He simply sat and watched as Alexander, after a long moment of shock, slowly picked up the storybook again. "Should we—" Alexander signed hesitantly to Emily. She looked at the king. He nodded once. So they continued. Alexander signed his stories, and Emily acted them out, and occasionally, very occasionally, Alexander would glance at his father as if checking to make sure this wasn't a dream. The king watched his son speak with his hands, and though he couldn't understand most of it, he didn't look away. Not once. The whispers started small, like poison seeping through cracks. "Have you heard? The human girl spends hours alone with the prince, in the library of all places, completely inappropriate. The king allows it, can you imagine?" Emily heard the rumors in the servants' hall, in the corridors, even in the kitchen where she picked up Alexander's breakfast every morning. The other servants no longer met her eyes. Some looked at her with envy, others with pity. Lily pulled her aside one evening, her face pale. "They're saying you've bewitched the prince, that you're using him to get close to power." "That's ridiculous. He's 7 years old." "Emily, listen to me." Lily grabbed her shoulders. "Lord Cassius spoke to the council yesterday. He said it's unsuitable for a human maid to have such influence over the heir. He called you a security risk. A security risk for teaching a lonely child to smile." But the opinions of the nobles didn't truly frighten Emily. What frightened her was the look on Alexander's face when she was 10 minutes late for breakfast one morning. The panic in his eyes, the way his hands trembled when he signed. "I thought they had made you go away." She was becoming important to him. Too important, and that made her vulnerable. The summons came on a grey afternoon. "Lord Chancellor Valerius requests your presence in the East Solar," a guard informed her, his expression carefully neutral. Emily's stomach sank. The Lord Chancellor was the king's chief advisor, second only to Nathaniel in authority. His word could end her career or her life. The East Solar was a cold room despite the fire burning in its hearth. Lord Valerius stood by the window, his back to her. He was an ancient vampire, lean as a blade, with silver hair pulled back in a severe knot. "Miss Thorne." He didn't turn. "Do you know why I've called you here?" "No, my lord." "I think you do." Now he turned, and his eyes were like chips of ice. "You've been seen spending considerable time with Prince Alexander, time that exceeds your duties as a breakfast server." "The prince likes having someone to talk to, my lord. I merely—" "The prince," Valerius interrupted, "is the heir to the vampire throne. His companions should be carefully selected from noble families, not plucked from the servant class on a whim." Emily's hands closed into fists at her sides. "With respect, my lord, those noble families don't speak his language." "A temporary limitation. The boy will outgrow this affliction. He will learn to communicate properly like any other member of royalty." "He already communicates properly, just not in a way you understand." The words escaped before Emily could stop them. Valerius's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You forget yourself, girl." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Let me be clear. There are members of this court who believe Prince Alexander is unsuitable as heir. They see his silence as weakness, a liability." Emily's blood ran cold. "They want to replace him. They want a strong successor, one who can address the council, negotiate with foreign dignitaries, command respect." Valerius moved closer, circling her like a predator. Your presence complicates matters. You make the prince comfortable in his isolation. You allow him to refuse to adapt. I help him feel less alone. You help him remain helpless." Valeria stopped in front of her. "The kindest thing you could do for Prince Alexander is to distance yourself. Let him struggle. Let him learn to survive in a world that will not sign back to him." "That's cruel. That is reality." Valerius's expression softened slightly. Or perhaps it was a trick of the light. "I am not a monster, Miss Thorne. I have served this kingdom for 4 centuries. I've seen weak rulers destroy nations. Prince Alexander needs to be strong, not coddled." He went to his desk and took out a sealed letter. "This is a transfer order. You will be reassigned to the South Wing, effective immediately. Better wages, lighter duties. You need never see the prince again." Emily stared at the letter as if it were a snake. "And if I refuse? Then you will be dismissed entirely. No references, no final wages." Valerius placed the letter between them. "Take the night to consider, but understand, this is not a negotiation. It is mercy." Emily went to the courtyard the following morning, her heart heavy as stone. She had spent the entire night wrestling with the decision: take the transfer and save her livelihood, or refuse and lose everything. But when she saw Alexander waiting by the fountain, her choice became clear. He knew immediately something was wrong. "What happened?" he signed, rushing over. "You look sad." "I'm fine." "You're lying." His small face was fierce. "Your hands are doing that thing they do when you're upset, all stiff. Did I do something wrong?" Alexander's signs grew smaller, more hesitant. "I can be quieter during our lessons. I won't ask you to stay as long. Please don't be mad at me." "Oh dear, no." Emily knelt and took his hands in hers. "You didn't do anything wrong. Nothing." Then what? How could she explain that his world was full of people who saw him as a problem to be solved, who wanted her gone because she made him happy? "Some people think I spend too much time with you," she signed carefully. Alexander's face scrunched up. "Father?" "No. Other people. People who don't understand." "They never understand," he signed. And the resignation in those small hands broke her heart. "It's okay, you can go, everyone leaves eventually." The casual acceptance in his signs, as if abandonment was just another fact of life, like rain or sunrise, made Emily's decision for her. "I'm not going anywhere," she signed fiercely. "Do you hear me? I'm staying." "But you said—" "I don't care what they say. You're my friend. Friends don't leave." Alexander stared at her. Then he threw his arms around her neck and held tight, his small body shaking with silent sobs. Neither of them saw the figure watching from the balcony above. King Nathaniel, who had heard every word of Valerius's warning, and now watched his son cling to the one person who had chosen to stay. The knock on Alexander's bedroom door came after midnight. The prince was sitting cross-legged on his bed, organizing his rock collection by moonlight. He had long ago given up trying to sleep at normal hours. The silence of night seemed less lonely than the silence of day. When the door opened, Alexander looked up, expecting his night guard. Instead, his father stood in the doorway. King Nathaniel seemed too large for the frame, his broad shoulders nearly touching both sides. He still wore his council clothes, though he had removed his crown. Without it, he looked different, tired, almost human. Alexander froze, a smooth riverstone clutched in his hand. His father never came to his chambers. They saw each other at formal dinners, at council presentations where Alexander sat silent and decorative, at occasions that required the heir's presence. But never here. Never in this private space that belonged only to Alexander. The king entered and closed the door. "Good evening, father." Alexander signed formally, putting away his rocks and sliding from the bed to make a bow. Nathaniel raised his hand. "Wait." His throat worked as if the words were stuck there. Finally, "May I sit?" Alexander nodded, confused. His father never asked permission for anything. The king lowered himself into the chair by Alexander's desk, a small chair made for a child, making him look almost comical, like a bear trying to fit into a dollhouse. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and for a long moment simply looked at his son. Alexander shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny. His hands moved nervously. "Did I do something wrong?" "No." Nathaniel's voice was rough. "No, you didn't do anything wrong." Silence stretched between them. Alexander's fingers twitched, wanting to sign, wanting to fill the void with words his father wouldn't understand. But he kept his hands still, waiting. "I've been thinking," Nathaniel said finally, "about your mother." Alexander's eyes widened. They never talked about her, not since she died. She would know what to do, what to say. The king's hands closed into fists. She was good at talking, at connecting. I'm good at war, at strategy, at breaking things. He looked at his scarred knuckles. "But not this, not you," Alexander signed before he could stop himself. His father stared at the hand movements, and Alexander saw frustration flash across his face. The same frustration Alexander felt every day trying to exist in a world that wouldn't speak his language. "This," Nathaniel said quietly. "Not this." He stood abruptly, began to pace. The small room made him look like a caged animal. "I've conquered kingdoms, negotiated peace treaties in 5 languages, commanded armies of thousands. But I can't—" He stopped, his back to Alexander. "I can't talk to my own son." Alexander's chest tightened. He had never heard his father sound like this, lost, vulnerable, almost desperate. The king turned to face him. "You move your hands so fast. With Emily, in the library, in the courtyard, I watch you and it's like you're speaking in lightning and I—" He lifted his own hands, large and calloused. "I don't understand any of it." "I could teach you," Alexander signed eagerly, hope blooming in his chest. "It's not hard, just shapes and—" But his father wasn't looking at his hands, couldn't read the offer being made. Alexander's hands fell to his sides. Nathaniel saw the movement, the disappointment. Something seemed to break in his expression. He crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt before his son. The second time in 2 weeks, he had lowered himself to Alexander's level. "Show me," he said. "One sign, just one, for son." Alexander's breath caught. Slowly, he raised his hand and demonstrated. A simple gesture. Fingers pointed toward himself, then swept outward. Nathaniel copied, awkward and uncertain. His fingers didn't quite match the shape. Alexander took his father's hand, so much larger than his own, and gently adjusted the position. His father's skin was warm, rougher than he expected. He couldn't remember the last time they had touched like this. "Like this," he signed with his free hand. "Like this." Nathaniel repeated the gesture. This time it was almost right. Alexander nodded enthusiastically. Then he showed him another sign. "Father." It was more complex. One hand to the forehead, then brought to the chest. "Protector." Strong. Nathaniel practiced 3 times before he got it right. When he finally did, he looked at Alexander with an expression the prince had never seen before. Pride, perhaps, or relief. "Say something to me," Alexander signed, his hands trembling with excitement. "Please." His father's jaw worked. He raised his hands, formed the signs slowly, deliberately. "My son." 2 words. Simple, imperfect, everything. Alexander's eyes filled with tears. He launched himself at his father, wrapping his small arms around the king's neck. Nathaniel caught him, held him, one large hand cradling the back of his son's head. They stayed that way for a long time in the moonlit chamber, neither signing nor speaking, just holding. When Nathaniel finally pulled away, his eyes were suspiciously bright. He tried to sign again, struggled, then gave up and simply spoke. "I need help. Will you teach me more? Will your friend? Will Emily teach me?" Alexander nodded so hard his whole body shook. "Tomorrow, then, after council." Nathaniel stood, smoothing his clothes back to order. At the door, he paused. His hands moved, uncertain but deliberate, forming the signs Alexander had just taught him. "Good night, my son." Alexander signed back, "Good night, father." After the king left, Alexander climbed back onto the bed and stared at the ceiling, his heart racing. For the first time in 5 years, since his mother died and his world went silent, he allowed himself to believe in something he thought lost forever. Hope. In his private office, King Nathaniel sat in darkness, practicing the signs over and over until his hands cramped. He had failed his son for too long, but it wasn't too late. Not yet. The spring procession was the kingdom's oldest tradition, a celebration of renewal when the royal family greeted their subjects from the great balcony and accepted their blessings for the coming season. In 7 years, Prince Alexander had never participated. The boy will be a distraction, Lord Valerius had argued each year. Better to keep him inside until he is older, more capable. But this year, when the council gathered to discuss the ceremony, King Nathaniel's voice cut through the debate like a sword through silk. "My son will stand at my side." The council chamber fell silent. "Your Majesty," Lord Cassius carefully ventured, "with all due respect, the prince cannot address the people. It would be awkward for all concerned." "He will stand at my side," Nathaniel repeated, his tone allowing no argument. "And Miss Thorne will accompany us as his interpreter." The murmurs rose like a swarm of angry bees, a human maid on the royal balcony, interpreting for the heir. Unthinkable. Unprecedented. Nathaniel let them protest. Then he rose and the chamber quieted. "My son is the heir to this throne. It is time the kingdom sees him, not as a silent shadow, but as their prince." His eyes swept the room, daring anyone to challenge him. This discussion is over. On the morning of the procession, Emily's hands trembled so badly she could barely tie her dress. A new one, deep blue with threads of silver provided by the king's butler. "Appropriate for the balcony," he had said, as if it were perfectly normal for a maid to stand beside royalty. Lily helped pin up Emily's hair. "You look terrified." "I am terrified." Emily stared at her reflection. "What if I make a mistake? What if I can't translate quickly enough? What if you help a little boy be seen by his kingdom for the first time?" Lily squeezed her shoulders. "You've got this." In his chambers, Alexander was equally nervous. He stood before the mirror in his formal attire, a small version of his father's ceremonial robes, black and silver with the royal crest embroidered on the chest. He looked like a storybook prince, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. His father entered without knocking, also dressed in full regalia. Crown, cape, the ancient sword of the realm at his hip. He looked every inch the warrior king, until he saw his son's fear and immediately knelt. "Scared," he signed. His signing had improved dramatically in the past 3 weeks of daily lessons with Emily. Alexander nodded, not trusting himself to sign back. "Me too," Nathaniel signed, and Alexander's eyes widened in surprise. His father, scared. The king smiled, a rare and genuine expression. "But we'll be scared together, and Emily will be there. You trust her." "Yes, then trust in that." Nathaniel's hands moved slowly, making sure his son understood. "You deserve to be seen, to be heard, not hidden away like something broken." "But I am broken," Alexander signed, his small hands heavy with resignation. "I can't speak like you." Nathaniel took his son's hands in his. "You speak perfectly. The world just needs to learn your language." He said it aloud, then signed it. Imperfect but sincere. "The world needs to learn your language." The great balcony overlooked the main courtyard where thousands had gathered. Humans and vampires alike, dressed in spring colors, carrying lanterns even in daylight as tradition required. Emily stood to the side as the royal family emerged. The king first, majestic and commanding. Then Alexander, so small beside his father, his face pale but determined. The crowd erupted in cheers. But when they noticed the young prince, many seeing him clearly for the first time, the sound faltered, confused. Nathaniel raised his hand for silence. His voice carried across the courtyard, amplified by the ancient acoustics built into the palace walls. "My people, today my son joins me, not as a shadow but as your prince." He gestured to Alexander, who stepped forward, his legs trembling. Nathaniel's hand moved to his son's shoulder, steady and supportive. "Prince Alexander will address you now. Miss Thorne will provide his voice." Emily moved to stand between them, visible to all. A human girl on the royal balcony, history being made in real time. Alexander looked at his father, terrified. Nathaniel nodded encouragement. The prince's hands began to move. Thank you for coming, he signed, and Emily's voice rang out clear and strong. Thank you for coming. The crowd stirred. Alexander's hands moved faster, gaining confidence. I know I am different. I know I cannot speak the way you expect, but I can still hear. I can still care. I can still hope to serve you one day. Emily translated each word, her voice steady even as tears pricked her eyes. My father taught me that strength comes in many forms, Alexander continued, looking up at the king. And my friend taught me that being different doesn't mean being less. He paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Then his hands moved in a broad gesture that needed no translation, a sign for beautiful, directed at the lanterns they carried. Someone in the crowd, a small child, waved back, mimicking the gesture. Then another person signed, hello, awkward and uncertain. Then another. A ripple of movement spread through the crowd as people began to raise their hands, trying simple signs, trying to speak back to their prince in his own language. Alexander's face transformed. His signs became animated, joyful, as he told them about the spring flowers in his courtyard, about birds and stories and hope. And beside him, King Nathaniel raised his own hands. Proud, he signed for all to see. Proud of you. The crowd understood the gesture, even without translation. The emotion was universal. The cheers that erupted weren't polite ceremony. They were genuine, thunderous and warm, washing over the balcony like a wave. For the first time, Prince Alexander wasn't invisible. He was seen. The lanterns floated like fallen stars over the city, thousands of them rising into the twilight sky. From a palace balcony, a private one this time, away from ceremony and crowds, 3 figures watched in comfortable silence. Alexander sat between his father and Emily, his legs swinging over the edge of the stone bench, still wearing his formal clothes, though he had convinced someone to remove the stiff collar. His face shone with lingering excitement, cheeks flushed from the day's events. Did you see how many people tried to sign back? His hands moved quickly, the way they always did when he was happy. There was a little girl in a yellow dress who signed hello and thank you, and I signed back and she smiled so big and... Breathe, Emily signed, laughing silently. Alexander grinned but didn't slow down. And the baker from the East Market. He signed bread and asked if I liked bread, and I said yes, and he looked so happy that I understood. And... What is he saying? Nathaniel asked, leaning forward. His signing had improved, but Alexander's excited speed still outpaced his ability to follow. He's recounting everyone who signed to him today, Emily translated, warmth in her voice. All 47 of them, in detail. Nathaniel's expression softened. He reached out and gently caught one of his son's flying hands. Slow, he signed carefully. I want to understand. Alexander took a deep breath and started again, slower this time, making sure his father could follow. He signed about the crowd, about the feeling of being seen, about not being invisible anymore. And Nathaniel understood most of it. Not all. There were still signs he didn't know, concepts he couldn't keep up with, but enough. More than enough. When Alexander finished, the king's hands moved deliberately. Proud of you, so proud. It was the same sign he had made on the great balcony, but somehow it meant more here in private, with no audience to perform for. Alexander threw his arms around his father's waist, and Nathaniel pulled him close. One large hand cradling the back of his son's head the way he used to when Alexander was a baby, before silence had grown between them like a wall. Thank you, Nathaniel said quietly to Emily over his son's head, for giving him back to me. I did nothing, Emily replied. I merely listened. You did everything. You saw him when the rest of us were blind. The king's eyes were bright in the lantern light. You saw him when the rest of us were blind. A comfortable silence settled over them as they watched the lanterns rise higher, carrying the city's wishes and prayers into the night sky. After a while, Alexander pulled away from his father and signed something Emily couldn't quite catch. The king frowned, trying to follow, then looked to Emily for help. He's asking if you'll tell him a bedtime story, she translated, in sign language, so he can understand every word. Nathaniel's expression flickered, uncertainty, fear of failing, then determination. I can try, he signed, but I'm not good with stories. You don't have to be good, Alexander signed back. You just have to be here. Something in those words hit Nathaniel deeply. Emily saw it in the way his shoulders dropped, in the way his breath caught. I'll leave you two alone, she said, starting to rise. No, Alexander signed urgently. Stay, please, you're part of this too. So she stayed. King Nathaniel, ruler of the vampire kingdom, conqueror of realms, began to sign a story, awkward and slow, often pausing to ask Emily for help with signs he didn't know. It was about a warrior who had forgotten how to be gentle, and a little bird who taught him to listen instead of fight. It wasn't a very good story. The plot wandered. The signs were imperfect. But Alexander watched his father's hands with complete focus, his dark eyes shining. And when Nathaniel signed the part where the warrior finally understood the bird's song, the prince smiled so widely it looked like his face might split in two. When the story ended, Alexander clapped in the silent applause Emily had taught him, bouncing with delight. Again, he signed. Tell another. It's late, Nathaniel signed back, but he was smiling. Tomorrow, promise? Promise. Alexander yawned despite himself, the excitement of the day finally catching up to him. Nathaniel stood, lifting his son easily. 7 was still young enough to be carried, though not for much longer. At the door, the king paused and turned to Emily. His free hand moved, forming signs that had taken hours to practice in private. Thank you for teaching me to see my son. He was always there, Emily signed back. You just needed to learn his language. We all did, Nathaniel agreed. Then, with his son falling asleep against his shoulder, he added, Tomorrow I will issue a royal decree. Sign language will be taught throughout the palace, to the guards, the servants, the council members, everyone. Your Majesty, that's not enough, but it's a start. His expression was serious now, regal. No child in my kingdom should feel invisible because the world won't learn their language, and no father should be separated from his son by something as simple as words. He carried Alexander away, the prince's small hand trailing behind them, fingers moving dreamily in unconscious signs, even as he drifted toward dreams. Emily remained on the balcony, watching the last lanterns disappear into the stars. She thought about the terrified girl who had spilled wine 3 weeks ago, certain she would be executed for speaking to a prince. About a lonely boy who had learned that being different meant being invisible. About a king who had forgotten how to be a father until his son taught him that strength came in many forms. Below in the courtyard, she saw palace guards already practicing signs with each other, laughing at their mistakes, trying again. Servants teaching nobles, nobles teaching children. A language of hands, spreading through the palace like spring flowers after a long winter. A new tradition born from a moment of broken crystal and spilled wine. Born from a simple question, Are you okay? And an answer that changed everything. Yes, I am now. 6 months later, the Royal Library held its first public sign language hour. Prince Alexander, now 8 years old, taught a room full of children, human and vampire alike, how to sign their names, tell stories and speak without voices. His father attended every session, sitting in the back, still learning, still trying, still there. And when Alexander signed his stories, hands moving like lightning, painting pictures in the air, the entire room understood. Finally, the silent air had found his voice, and the kingdom had learned to listen.